The high school I attended was small, and yet the social structure was nevertheless as complicated as any high school. At lunch, most of us tried to get out of the cafeteria as soon as possible. The gearheads headed to the back parking lot and stood leaning against their cars, the smoke thick in the air around them. A smaller group of the more academically oriented students gathered in the classroom of the literature teacher, safe from the harassing of the jocks. The jocks and some of the more popular girls hung out in the gym, shooting baskets and bullying those they could. And in that complex social structure, Joe Flynn was a force to be dealt with. Joe was the big man on campus, an athletic, aggressive, and sometimes mean king of the hill. He was the quarterback on the football team, though he was big enough to play on the offensive line. He was the starting center on the basketball team and threw his weight around like Shaquille O'Neal. He threw the shot put and discus in track and field, and also ran sprints. Normally civil, Joe had a mean streak. At halftime of a basketball game that was particularly frustrating for Joe, he grabbed our starting guard, threw him up against the lockers. "You're not getting me the ball inside." In that complex social structure, one of my rules was stay clear of Joe Flynn. On a cold Friday night in January after a home basketball game, I'd had a frustrating night on the court, and I just wanted to get home. I turned the corner in front of the high school, and I hit a patch of ice. I wasn't going fast, but it didn't matter. When I turned the steering wheel, the car didn't turn. And when I hit the brakes, the car didn't stop. I just slid. Slower and slower I slid and was almost at a stop when bang! I hit a beat-up four-door Olds Cutlass and put a nice dent in the back door. You want to guess whose car it was? So I had a decision to make. And my decision at that point was not based on morality or ethics. It was based on survival. If it was anybody else's car, the decision would have been easy. Do the right thing and tell them. But this was Joe Flynn. I could keep driving and hope that nobody saw me, or I could go back into the school and tell Joe what happened. And I felt like I was between a rock and a hard place. So I walked back into the school, and I met Joe just as he was coming out of the locker room. And his response, don't worry about it, there was a dent in that door anyway. And so in the complex social environment of Elgin Millville High School, I had taken a risk, and it worked out. So also the unjust manager in today's parable finds himself in a pickle. He has a decision to make, and it doesn't seem like he has any good options. He's between a rock and a hard place. And this parable also happens within a complex set of social rules and rituals within the stratified economy of Palestine, where there were the very rich and the very poor. And so the manager now faces an uncertain future because he's gotten caught in his laziness. He has to devise a way to make it in the world because, as he said, he's not strong enough to dig and too ashamed to beg. And so he cuts deals. He takes care of his master's clients in the hope that when he is out in the street, those clients will take care of him. And in the meantime, he discovers that money has power. He works the rules of the society in which he lives and discovers what money can do. The rich master also knows the rules, and that's why he can't do anything about what the steward has done. If he goes back to those clients and insists that they pay for the full bill, he now will lose face. And we might imagine this master seething under his breath, wanting nothing more than to get rid of the relationship with this lazy and unscrupulous steward. But in a surprising twist, the master instead commends the manager. What? How in the world can he end up praising the man who has just ripped him off? Well, maybe the master praises the manager because the manager finally gets it. This slacker has not worked very hard, and he hasn't been very conscientious in managing the assets of his master. But now he finally understands the power that money wields. He finally gets how important and potent money is. And so in a last-ditch effort, just before he gets fired, he finally realizes what he should never have underestimated and what he should have known all along. And so this parable is about money. Jesus uses the story to illustrate the values of God's reign and about where money stands and how it is to be used. Here in this parable, Jesus says, in effect, look, people, look at these guys. They know how powerful money is. Learn from them. Dear church, we need to be clear about money's role in human society. Jesus instructs us not to underestimate the power of money or to deny the power that money has. Wealth has the power to change things. Wealth can alter relationships. Wealth has the power to tell people where they do and do not belong. In his interpretive comments at the end of the parable, Jesus even compares wealth to God. Both money and God make claims on people. Both claim to offer security. Both demand allegiance. Both promote their own ideas about human society and about human society should operate and flourish. But as Jesus instructs, they are competing claims. Jesus says, you can't serve both. And so in sort of a backhanded way, Jesus is also inviting us to understand that money can be used to accomplish the work of the kingdom. Money can do things for the church. We learned that money has the power to transform relationships. It can do that in the church too, for good or for ill. But for us, the transformation comes in a different way. It doesn't come by using money to exert power over people. Instead, in the church, we reorder what money is able to do. We use it so that it aligns with the values of the kingdom, so that money accomplishes God's work. We redistribute our wealth for God's sake. We give away what we have without expecting anything in return. And unlike the dishonest manager who cuts deals, giving so that he might get, we give without expecting any favors in return, so that when we give our money away, we're also giving away power over people. And Jesus promises that that kind of generosity results in its own kind of security, a different kind of security than the world preaches. And when we practice this kind of generosity, we can subvert money's power to dictate social values and social structures. There is something delightfully subversive in using money against its own tendencies by giving it away. Of course, while this parable is about money, it's not only about money. It's about a certain way of being in the world, a way that runs counter to the conventions of our society. Our world has its own notions about how to succeed and how to have an impact. And if we want to accomplish those things, they ask us to play by a certain set of rules. And so achievement is measured in terms of accomplishment and salary. Successful business is measured in terms of maximum profits and shareholder dividends. Not so in the kingdom. Achievement is measured in service. Success in terms of relationship. And this way of being, dear church, does not come naturally. In fact, it only comes through a supernatural rebirth and a constant reorientation of our lives away from ourselves to the crucified one, away from happiness to joy, away from myself to my neighbor. It's the reorientation that happened first at our baptism, that happens again every time we gather here and every time we come to this table of grace. It happens in the daily repentance and forgiveness when the fruit of Jesus' death and resurrection comes once again into our lives. Here again, we are molded and shaped to live as people of the kingdom, so that what God values becomes what we value. Can I say that again? So that what God values becomes what we value. And when that happens, whether we're talking about money or achievement or success, the powerful forces of human culture become forces for God's good, for God's kingdom. Honestly, I did not choose this text for the last Sunday of our stewardship call. I just preach them as they come. But it does seem to be a fitting text, doesn't it? As we remember, all that we have is from God. We are not the owners. We are the stewards. And we are called to be generous in giving what we have, that God's work be done. And dear church, that is worth celebrating.